Hello everyone, it's me again. I'm here with another video. Today's video will be, what if 20th Century Fox made a Spider-Man movie? I honestly feel like this could have happened because Fox had two of Marvel's biggest characters, X-Men and Fantastic Four. They had the rights to the Fantastic Four and the X-Men, but they didn't have the rights to Spider-Man because those rights were owned by Sony. But what if Sony didn't have those rights, but instead Spider-Man? No, I mean Fox. I was gonna say so like Spider-Man owned by Fox, It also could have been possible because Spider-Man the animated series did air on Fox Kids back in the 90s, so it would have made perfect sense. So, in this timeline, Fox would have had the movie rights to Spider-Man. Not Sony. So, what happens now as a consequence? The first X-Men movie released in 2000 wouldn't change at all. But then we get to Spider-Man, which would be released in 2002, which is basically the same movie, except Hugh Jackman's Wolverine would make a cameo as originally planned, thus suggesting the film at least takes place during the events of X-Men or before, even after X-Men. And also Green Goblin would survive because considering Fox kept Magneto and Doctor Doom alive at the end of their first debuts in the first films of their heroes, Fox would make the decision to keep Green Goblin alive, and any rivalry between Peter and Harry would be abandoned. However, Norman would be sent to jail, and Harry would be at a hard place at a hard time. Understandable. The film still does well regardless. Next, we would have X-Men 2, X-Men United. It's just the same movie. I don't see a reason to change it. I know I'm basing this off my Cinematic Universe videos, but I'm kind of going to be bending the rules a bit, if I'm being honest. But it would be mentioned that Wolverine was in New York, thus referencing the events of the first Spider-Man movie. Speaking of Spider-Man, we would then get Spider-Man 2, which is basically the same film, except there'd be a new secondary villain in the form of Mysterio, who would be played by Bruce Campbell. And the X-Men would be mentioned, thus suggesting that X-Men United takes place during the events of Spider-Man 2. Then, of course, we would have is the 2005 Fantastic Four film. That's the same movie, except Spider-Man would make a cameo, meaning Johnny Storm, since they were best friends in the comics. And Spider-Man would also probably cameo in Daredevil, since Kingpin was an enemy of Spider-Man in the comics. Then we get to 2006, with X-Men The Last Stand. The film would focus more on the Dark Phoenix storyline than the Mutant Cure. Also, Cyclops lives and Professor X. The big sacrifice of the film probably would have been Iceman. And maybe even Nightcrawler, since it was never revealed that Mystique and Nightcrawler were mother and son like in the comics. The latter of which may be a controversial decision, but still. However, instead of Magneto being the villain, it'd be Mr. Sinister, who would want to control the Phoenix Force for his own desires, since he has had a history with Jean and Scott in the comics. However, in the end, Jean would be restored normal, and Spider-Man could even make a cameo. And there would be a setup between Kitty and Peter having a romance, like in the Ultimate Comics. Speaking of romance, the romance between Kitty Pryde and Iceman would be dropped, and Gambit would also be introduced as a a romance between him and Rogue, like in the comics. And Gambit would be a way to help Rogue get over Bobby's death. It'd also be emotional for Spider-Man since they were friends in the comics. Then we get to 2007. Spider-Man 3. Rather than Venom being the villains would be Shocker, Sandman, and Green Goblin. Apparently, Green Goblin would break free out of jail just to bring the trilogy full circle. And of course, Peter and MJ's relationship would start falling apart. Shocker would be more of a side villain, while Green Goblin and Sandman are the villains. Even Green Goblin at one point would be holding not only MJ, but Gwen and Sandman's family hostage. Green Goblin holding Gwen hostage would be a reference to the night Gwen Stacy died storyline. But Gwen would not die, no. Instead, it'd probably be someone like Captain Stacy, and instead of Dr. Connors being the one to convince that Peter should get rid of the black suit, it would be someone like Professor X or Reed Richards. Harry also wouldn't die. But Peter and MJ's relationship would meet an end in this film, as Norman would be defeated once and for all, likely having been killed. And then, of course, Harry and Gwen would be together. Then, of course, we have Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, which would take place after Spider-Man 3, and Venom would actually make a cameo at the end, and he would have been set up in Spider-Man 3, instead of Topher Grace, who would be played by R.C. Everbeck, as he would have gotten the symbiote at the end. In 2009, rather than, X-Men Origins Wolverine, we would have gotten a Venom spinoff, which would focus on Venom facing off against Carnage, who would be played by Jim Carrey, and Spider-Man would be in this film. In 2010 and 2011 would see the conclusion to the original X-Men saga. That would be X-Men 4, split into 2 films, with Apocalypse as the main antagonist. I am aware that the Sentinels were set up in The Last Stand, but that setup can be replaced with a setup of Apocalypse. In terms of new members, they'd be Banshee, played by Liam Neeson, Forge, played by Johnny Depp, Emma Frost, played by Teresa Palmer, and Darwin, who I think could have been played by the same actor who played him in X-Men First Class, and Jewel Jubilee, who would have been played by Jamie Hun. As for who would play Apocalypse, I'd say Lawrence Fishburne, and his 4 horsemen would be Mr. Sinister, Archangel, Rogue, in which he uses Rogue's grief over Iceman as a way to turn her against the team, and Mystique. At the end of X-Men Apocalypse, the X-Men lose. And then we get to X-Men 5, which would be called X-Men Days of Future Past, which is kind of like a similar film, just that the Sentinels would be replaced with Apocalypse's threat. And there's a resistance team. Basically, members of the X-Men Apocalypse killed were Cyclops, Jean Grey, even Banshee and Darwin. And so the team have to figure out a way to undo the damage Apocalypse did. thus doing the time travel plot with Wolverine having to undo everything, and in the end, it's successful. The team manages to stop Apocalypse at the cost of the deaths of Forge, Professor X, and Magneto, as it would end the original X-Men saga on a bittersweet note. Also, Archangel dies. However, 2011 would see the release of Spider-Man 4, which would feature Vulture as the main villain, but however, the film doesn't do as well as the first three because by that point, Marvel Studios would be rising in success, thus leading any future Fox films in the hands of Marvel to start a slow decline at the box office. Maybe not a lot, but bit by bit. Spider-Man 4 makes less money than the original trilogy and cancels plans for future sequels and spin-offs. Thus, in 2015, Fox would reboot Spider-Man and X-Men. All in the same year as Fantastic Four. Or maybe Fantastic Four would have gotten rebooted first in 2014 and then Spider-Man and X-Men in 2015. Or Spider-Man gets rebooted in 2014 while X-Men and Fantastic Four get rebooted in 2015. I don't know, honestly. But that's what 20th Century Fox made a Spider-Man movie. If you want to cover the history, I'm not going to make a part 2. Instead, almost glimpse at this timeline for a reboot of these franchises will be covered in What If Captain America was the main character of the Infinity Saga. But that's only going to be like Captain America and... Not Captain America, X-Men, and Spider-Man. Since Fox probably would still have the rights to the Fantastic Four. But anyways, I'll see you all later.